The moment I rolled into Pine Hollow Ranch Estates, I knew I didn't belong. It wasn't the kind of place that welcomed ex-military loners with weathered skin and a rusted Ford. It was manicured lawns, Pinterest-perfect porches, and stiff smiles that didn't reach the eyes. But I wasn't here to fit in. I came for the silence. 22 years in the Army had taught me how to disappear into the edges. That little log cabin tucked near the pine brick, that was my reward. No neighbors within shouting distance. No sirens, no barked orders, just the low rumble of wind through the trees and the occasional deer track near the creek. Peace. At least. Until Janet Beckman arrived. She was the newly minted president of the HOA, mid-50s, helmet blonde hair, sunglasses too large for her face, and a permanent expression like she'd just smelled something offensive. Her Lexus stopped at my cabin less than 24 hours after I moved in. She didn't knock. She strutted, clipboard in hand, lips tight, eyes scanning everything like she was appraising it for auction. "You must be Mr. Walker," she said, without introduction. "Retired Army." Yes, I nodded, not offering more. My boots were muddy, and I was elbow deep in fixing the corral gate. She didn't seem to notice or care. "I'm the HOA president here, which means we have certain expectations. I've taken a look around and, well, there are some immediate issues." I wiped my hands on a rag. "Is that right?" She tilted her chin toward the cabin. "That rifle above your door, it needs to be removed. All firearms must be kept out of visible areas per Section 14B of the Community Safety Code." I glanced back at the .3006 in Old Remington, clean and legal, mounted high and well inside my front wall. It hadn't been fired since a hog raid, 6 months ago on my last ranch. "This isn't a city condo," I said. "This is the edge of forest land. That rifle's not for show, it's for keeping hogs from tearing through yards." Her smile was thin, icy. "This is a family-friendly development, Mr. Walker. The board voted no visible weapons. You'll need to comply." She left a printed violation notice taped to my fence post. I tore it off and dropped it in the fire pit, but Janet Beckman didn't take kindly to defiance. Over the next week I received a flood of citations, one for my barbed wire fence deemed aggressive in appearance, another for the camo top I'd pitched while working on roof repairs labeled visual disruption, 3 separate warnings for the rifle. I filed appeals. They were lost. Neighbors kept their distance. Most were suburban transplants who'd mistaken the scent of pine for safety. They didn't know wild hogs had started pushing further into residential areas, digging up lawns, attacking pets, even charging people during the dry season. They just wanted quiet views and HOA potlucks. But Janet, she wanted submission. 2 weeks later, sheriff's deputy showed up at my cabin. He looked apologetic the moment he stepped out of his cruiser. "Mr. Walker," he said, nodding at me, "I've been asked to speak to you about an escalating HOA complaint. About the rifle." Behind him, Janet emerged from her car with a triumphant gleam in her eyes. Her phone was already recording. "Under HOA Resolution 112A, she announced loudly, "you are now in violation of Community Enforcement Code. You'll need to turn over the weapon to preserve neighborhood safety." The deputy sighed. "They filed an official report. If you refuse, they can elevate it to the county. I'm just here to avoid that." I looked at him, then at her, then at the woods beyond the tree line. Quiet now, but I knew what stirred out there. I'd seen the tracks, heard the snorting near the creek last night. Still, I unslung the rifle from the mount and handed it over. The deputy took it gently, with a nod of regret. Janet clapped once, beaming. "Excellent. Now we can restore a little civility to this place." As she turned to leave, I saw it, a single wild boar print in the dirt beside her Lexus fresh. She didn't notice, but I did, and I smiled just a little. The first night without my rifle was uneventful. The second wasn't. At 3:43 a.m., I woke to the low guttural snorts of wild hogs echoing through the trees closer than I'd ever heard them before. I stepped onto the porch, flashlight in hand, and swept the beam across the pasture. 6 sets of glowing eyes blinked back. Big ones. They were rooting near the edge of my property, tusks flashing as they tore into the soil like plows. One of them, a mean-looking boar with a split ear, was already halfway through the wire fence. I couldn't do a damn thing but watch. The old rifle they took wasn't just a gun. It was a warning to the wild that someone here knew how to deal with them. Without it, I was just another part of the landscape. Prey. By dawn, the damage was clear. The fence was collapsed in 2 places. My compost bin was overturned. Deep hoof-carved furrows ripped through the yard like miniature canyons. I didn't file a complaint. Janet wouldn't care. She'd probably send another citation for landscape disturbance. Sure enough, by noon she did. Violation number 17, yard appearance not in compliance with HOA beautification code. There was a photo attached. It showed the churned earth where the boars had fed. But that wasn't the worst part. That same day, I saw them in her yard. It was just before sunset when I spotted the sounder, at least 8 of them mambling through the green belt and into the neighborhood proper. They weren't running. They weren't scared. They were claiming territory. Janet's house, with its pristine flower beds and automatic sprinklers, looked like a buffet line. They started with her front garden. By the time her porch lights flickered on, her rose trellis was already half shredded. The hogs were snorting, digging, flopping into mulch beds like pigs in spa tubs. Janet opened her door and screamed. The boars didn't flinch. One glanced up and went right back to digging. She came running out with a broom, flailing and shouting, slapping the porch rail as if the noise would scare them. All it did was rile up the biggest male, who let out a bark of warning and charged, stopping short but close enough to make her trip backward into her potted lilies. She didn't come back out. The next day the HOA email chain exploded. I wasn't supposed to have access, but one neighbor, old Mr. Lot from 2 houses down, forwarded it to me with a subject line, told her the messages were frantic, greater than they tore through my lawn. My dog won't even go outside now. Why, aren't we calling animal control? Janet's response came 10 minutes later. It was defensive, full of jargon, and worse, proud, greater than wildlife as a part of our rural charm. Panic is unnecessary. I've contacted animal services, who advise that tranquilization or relocation is not their responsibility. Furthermore, the HOA prohibits civilian use of firearms, bait traps, or hunting dogs. We are exploring humane solutions. Translation: she had no idea what to do. I didn't gloat. Not yet. But the irony was heavy. She had disarmed the one person with the training and equipment to manage the very problem now devouring her ferns. That evening I watched again from my porch. The same splitted boar climbed onto her deck and sniffed her lounge chair like it owned the place. Then, with regal indifference, it settled into her floral cushions and closed its eyes. I nearly choked on my coffee. She stepped outside again, this time with a spray bottle. The boar opened one eye. She sprayed. The breeze turned, and mist blew back into her own face. The boar rose, slow and deliberate, and trotted toward her with the confident menace of something that knows it can't be touched. She slammed the door and disappeared. That night, the sounders grew bolder. I heard them crashing through ornamental shrubs, knocking over garbage bins, ripping up irrigation lines like kids tearing open Christmas presents. By morning, 2 more neighbors had filed official complaints with the HOA, and that afternoon, notice appeared on my gate. Violation number 18. Failure to prevent wildlife migration into community zones. I laughed so hard I nearly fell off the porch. She blamed me, the guy she disarmed, for not protecting the community from an invasion. She invited with her arrogance and bylaws, but I didn't rip it down this time. I left it hanging in the wind like a surrender flag she couldn't even see, because I knew this was just the beginning. And Janet Beckman had no idea what wild boars were truly capable of when left unchecked. By the time the 3rd week rolled around, the wild boars were no longer visitors, they were residents. They nested in drainage ditches, wallowed in backyard koi ponds, and strutted down the main road like they paid the HOA dues. And Janet Beckman, she was unraveling. It began subtly. Her hair, once helmet-styled and frozen with hairspray, now curled in loose, frantic frizz. The perfect pink suits she favored were replaced by baggy windbreakers and rubber boots. One morning I spotted her crawling beneath her Lexus, dragging chicken wire across her driveway as if hogs couldn't just step over it. The woman who once wrote citations with surgical precision was now the most paranoid resident on the block. Poetic justice. Still, she refused to admit defeat. Instead, she doubled down. She summoned a community safety assembly, held right in the cul-de-sac under a bright white HOA tent that someone forgot to stake properly. A gust of wind sent the whole thing airborne halfway through her speech. I didn't attend, but neighbors filled me in. Janet ranted for 20 straight minutes, blamed non-compliant residents for failing to respect wildlife protocols, claimed that the hogs were provoked. At one point she accused someone of feeding them deliberately. People booed. One guy threw a bag of torn-up roses at her feet. Later that night, a dozen fresh violations appeared in mailboxes, mine included. This time, the citation accused me of encouraging destructive wildlife through inaction. It ended with a bolded threat. Final warning before legal escalation. That was it. I'd kept to myself, hoping the situation would teach her humility. But now she was trying to make me the scapegoat for her failure, so I made a decision not to hurt her, not to break any rules, just to let nature finish the job she'd started. I began leaving my porch light on all night. The hogs, drawn by the warmth and relative safety, shifted their patterns. Instead of passing through, they lingered longer each night. Then I moved my compost pile closer to her fence line, not baiting, just reorganizing. A few overripe apples and some carrot tops went missing the first night. By the 3rd, the hogs had worn a visible path from my cabin to her backyard. I didn't even need to encourage them anymore. They knew where the food was, where the peace was, where no one chased them off. One morning, a neighbor showed me a video, Janet on her porch, shrieking as a pair of boars rooted through her tulip beds. One climbed onto her outdoor recliner, knocked over a lantern, and miraculously triggered the automatic sprinklers. The spray startled the hog, which ran headfirst into a planter and flipped it into her bay window. Glass everywhere. Janet filed an insurance claim. It was denied. Act of nature, they told her that afternoon. She snapped. She marched up my gravel path, no clipboard, no smile, just fury. You, she barked. This is your fault. You brought this chaos here. I set down my hammer. You banned my rifle. Janet, you You could have warned us. I did. I warned you before the first one set foot in this neighborhood. She threw a crumpled paper at my feet. Another citation, this one handwritten, barely legible. I'll have you removed, she hissed. You'll lose everything. I picked it up and calmly tore it in half. You're not president of anything anymore, Janet. No one's listening. That stopped her cold. What are you talking about? I handed her my phone. The community forum, previously her domain, was flooded with demands for her resignation. A petition had over 100 signatures. Homeowners were angry, embarrassed, and tired of seeing their HOA fees used for hog-chasing committees. Instead of solutions, she blinked at the screen like she couldn't process what she was seeing. No, this was supposed to be orderly, controlled. You tried to rule nature with a rule book, I said. Nature doesn't read fine print. She didn't reply. She just turned and stumbled back down the path, shoulders slumped, heels dragging, through the dirt she once deemed non-compliant. That night I stood on my porch and watched the moon rise over a much quieter forest. No hogs in sight. Strange. First, I thought they'd just moved on, but I knew better. They were waiting for what came next. And so was I. 3 days passed. No sightings, no snorts in the underbrush, no shredded flower beds or overturned compost bins. At first, the neighborhood breathed easier. Lawns were replanted, security cameras unplugged. Janet, noticeably absent since her outburst on my path, stopped posting entirely. A fragile calm settled over Pine Hollow Ranch estates like morning dew, thin, temporary. I wasn't fooled. Wild boars don't just vanish. They regroup, and they return. That return came at 4:17 a.m. on a Sunday, loud, fast, and with a vengeance. The split-eared boar led the charge, flanked by 4 others like a tusked cavalry. They ripped through the newly sodded commons, trampled the HOA welcome sign, and tore into Janet's prized white fence like it was paper. I woke to the sound of panic-barking dogs, car alarms, the unmistakable crunch of wooden trellises being shattered under hooves. By the time I pulled on my boots and stepped outside, half the neighborhood was standing in driveways in robes and boxes, watching helplessly as nature took its dues. Janet's yard was ground zero. The boars had returned, with interest. Her hydrangeas, obliterated porch chairs, split in half. One hog stood on her Lexus's hood, muddy hooves streaking across the windshield as it grunted like a king surveying his domain. And then came the moment that changed everything. Janet burst from her front door, holding a broom. Again, she charged, shrieking, flailing the handle like it was a weapon. The lead boar barely blinked, instead lunged, not to gore, just enough to scare. She screamed and backpedaled, tripping over a sprinkler head and landing hard in the mud. It was over in seconds. The hogs scattered after their dominance display, retreating calmly into the woods, but the damage was done. Pride shattered, property ruined, and dignity long gone. Later that morning, the emergency HOA meeting was held on my porch. Not because I asked, but because the board, what was left of it, showed up at my gate uninvited. "Mr. Walker," said Tom Whitaker, a soft-spoken accountant from Lot 12, "we're asking you to take over as interim HOA president." I blinked. "You're serious? You're the only one who knew what was coming. You warned us, and you were the only one who could have stopped it." I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I just shook my head. "I'm not interested in politics," I said. "I'll protect this land, I'll protect the people, but I'm not sitting behind a folding table arguing about mailbox colors." Tom nodded. "Fair enough, but we need your help." So I gave it on my terms. First, I got my rifle back, legally reinstated. The HOA repealed Section 1(b) in a unanimous vote, with a formal apology attached to my case file. Second, I called in some favors. 3 old buddies and wildlife techs rolled in with trailers, corral panels, and remote traps. We spent 4 days quietly baiting the hogs with fermented corn and molasses, tracking their patterns, predicting their moves. It wasn't warfare. It was a chess match. By the end of the week, we'd captured 17 hogs alive, unharmed, were transported to a state-approved wildlife facility for relocation. Not a single shot fired, no drama, no bloodshed, just discipline. That Friday, as we dismantled the last corral, Janet emerged from her house. She looked smaller, quieter, as if the weight of everything had finally settled on her shoulders. She approached slowly, clutching a manila envelope. "I had this notarized," she said. "My resignation." I took it, nodded once, and didn't speak. "I didn't understand," she murmured. "I thought order meant control, rules, structure, but it's more than that, isn't it?" "It's respect," I replied, "for the land, for the people who know it." She glanced at the woods, those same trees she once called a nuisance. "I'm leaving," she added, "putting the house on the market." I said nothing, just watched her walk away. Sometimes the lesson isn't in the punishment, it's in the silence that follows. Weeks passed. The hogs never returned. I rebuilt my fence. Neighbors brought beer and pie as thanks. The HOA meetings, if you could call them, that became back porch potlucks with real conversation and fewer rules. And the rifle, it's back above the door where it belongs, not as a weapon, but as a reminder of what happens when arrogance challenges nature and loses.